Scott just made the point yesterday.
It used to be a lot more secure, not just.
Is it racial discrimination for a college to make student applicants confess their encounters with law enforcement, even if they were never convicted? I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Stephen Green and Bill Whittle. Well, men, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law is probing 17 Southern universities over admissions questions like this one from Auburn University's application, which says, and I quote, "Have you ever been charged with or convicted of or pled guilty or nolo contendere to a crime other than a minor traffic offense, or are there any criminal charges now pending against you?" Now, we've all likely answered that question on applications more than once in our lives, but we're white guys. And the civil rights group says that minorities are more likely to have experienced brushes with the law. The question on a college application raises the barrier to admissions, they say, for minorities who may decide not to apply rather than to admit to previous charges, even if they were not convicted. Auburn's student body, for example, is only 7% black in a state that's about 25% black. Now, the universities, for their part, say that the question is a factor that may spark further questions, but it's not an automatic bar to admission. But NYU, New York University, among other schools, has challenged whether a common application used by 600 universities should include such questions, wondering if they have any predictive value or serve merely as a means of racial exclusion. Now, Stephen Green, you're from the party of none of your Dapper Dan business, but if a college is going to put a young man in a co-ed dorm, for example, and assume some legal liability for his presence, doesn't it have a right to explore all relevant character questions?
Yeah, this is a great topic. So it really hits the crux of our history of racial injustice, our attempts to rectify by some great means and some not great means the uglier parts of this country's history. And, you know, America is supposed to be the land of second chances, of third chances. We have easy bankruptcy laws, some of the easiest in the world, because we want to encourage people to take risks. And one of the risks you take in starting a business is going broke. So we have some of the world's easiest bankruptcy laws. You know, we have 50-year-olds going back to college to get their engineering degrees because they decided, you know, in their mid-40s that they weren't making enough money. With this is the country of opportunity, and that opportunity is not supposed to be limited to one and you're out. Like the German system, where when you're very young, you either get tracked to a trade school or a university. And, you know, they determine this stuff when you're 11, 12 years old. It's a very one chance kind of a system. And I like to think we're better than that. What I would like to look for is if I'm an administrator and I'm seeing this question, I'm looking at these answers on this question, now I want to talk to this kid. Okay, you had a run-in with the law. But what did you learn from this? What were the circumstances? Did you decide? Was this an instigator in making you want to improve yourself? And that is why you want to come to my university. There are so many different ways that you can look at this that I would like to be able to trust the administrators to have these open minds and these warm hearts to second and third chances, this American way that we're supposed to have. So before I say, yes, we need to ask this of everyone, or no, we shouldn't ask this of anybody, what I would like to see is what the actual process is at these schools, what they do with this information, and whether or not they're actively looking for kids who really want to take a second chance to improve themselves, because that's really the kind of student a university should want to have.
Well, Bill Whittle, among the schools that ask the brush with the law question are historically black colleges. Shouldn't they know better, realizing that young black men are targeted disproportionately by police, and so they shouldn't have to endure further harassment, should they?
Maybe they want to protect young black women on these black college campuses. You know, I mean, this certainly would be the case they're trying to make. As Steve said, this is a really interesting question. I actually love questions like this because it challenges, you know, my belief systems, and it kind of splits me right down my conservatarian center there. On one hand, I completely agree that, you know, it's really none of the school's business. If the guy's not in jail, then he's not in jail, and he's served his debt to society or whatever the case may be. You know, there is that to be taken into account. I certainly think for a state school that would do it, The part of me that believes that a private business can be run any way a private business wants to be run tells me that if a university wants to put in that kind of question and also wants to have all the applicants come in waving a palm frond over their head, that's their business too, and they can do whatever they damn well want to, as long as it's a private company. You know, I guess I don't really know why, if this is such a big issue, why doesn't the university simply do criminal background checks on all of their incoming students? I mean, you know, most businesses, when you're hiring upper level people, they'll do a pretty quick scan to see if you have a criminal record. I mean, if they're really that worried about it, why don't you do that? And then, you know, if you want to dedicate those resources, you can. I do think that a university has well, let's just say again, this is a tough question for me, Scotty, because generally I like to be left alone. I really do. But let's just say that you put this policy in place and you do a criminal background check on everybody that comes into your university, not just black kids or whoever, or suspicious backgrounds. Everybody uniformly gets a criminal background check. Let's say you find a guy who has a history of multiple, you know, sexual abuse, or at least, you know, maybe charges weren't brought against him. Might be something you want to think about. But I always find that when I have to err on a side of an issue, I generally err on the side of, hey, leave somebody alone. If they're not actually in prison, then we can presume that they've either been given a slap on the wrist, the crime wasn't serious, the charges were dropped, or they served their debt to society. I think that's probably where I'm going to come down on this one. You have a chance to start again in America. If you're not in prison and you're not on probation, okay.
I can answer part of the question that you raised there because I've worked in ministry for years, and I know that anybody who has to work in children's ministry undergoes a police background check. I've had been through several of those. The challenge with police background checks is that they don't cover juvenile records. And so the juvenile records are sealed, and when you've got somebody who's applying to get into college at the age of 18 or 17 in many cases, unfortunately, the background check would come up clean for most everybody, with rare exceptions. So it is a conundrum. Listen, I was arrested during my senior year in college for trespassing on a construction site. In the wee hours of the morning after my band had played a gig at a local bar, we decided to explore. As I lay stargazing, 6 stories up on top of a crane, police cars swarmed the site. Despite my clever camouflage, their flashlights were powerful, and they discovered me and demanded that I descend from my perch at something less than terminal velocity. Now, for years after that, I had to confess the crime and occasionally explain it on applications of various kinds. It was humiliating, but I had pled guilty and paid the fine. Another time, I was stopped while drunk driving. I was also disobeying a one-way street sign, and then I executed an illegal U-turn. The officer knew I was DUI, but he didn't test me, and he only wrote up the traffic violation. In my mind, it was a much more serious crime than the construction site trespass and more indicative of the risk that I posed to others. But I was not charged, and thus had never had to report it on applications. It's not unreasonable for a school to assess the character as well as the intellect of applicants to whom it will entrust its good name and give the run of its property. But I'd like to see the results of a study on whether the application questions are actually effective. Perhaps the answer would remain a mystery since we don't know who failed to apply in order to avoid the question. Though a handful of civil rights lawyers may think the question is prima facie discrimination, I guarantee you that a swarm of attorneys will descend upon any school that fails to consider the background of a student who goes on to commit a heinous crime. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at pjtv.com, I'm Scott Ott.